What I'm going to do here is I'm going to read this article to you. I haven't read this article myself, so if I have any reaction to it, I will be reacting spontaneously. I kind of have an idea what it is about, and I will just read it to you. A mass assassination factory inside Israel's calculated bombing of Gaza. Permissive airstrikes on non-military targets and the use of an artificial intelligence system have enabled the Israeli army to carry out its deadliest war on Gaza. A 972 and local call investigation reveals. The Israeli army's expanded authorization for bombing non-military targets, the loosening of constraints regarding expected civilian casualties, and the use of an artificial intelligence system to generate more potential targets than ever before appear to have contributed to the destructive nature of the initial stages of Israel's current war on the Gaza Strip, an investigation by 972 magazine and local call reveals. These factors, as described by current and former Israeli intelligence members, have likely played a role in producing what has been one of the deadliest military campaigns against Palestinians since the Nakba of 1948. The investigation is based on conversations with 7 current and former members of Israel's intelligence community, including military intelligence and Air Force personnel who were involved in Israeli operations in the besieged Strip. In addition to Palestinian testimonies, data, and documentation from the Gaza Strip, and official statements by and other Israeli state institutions. Compared to previous Israeli assaults on Gaza, the current war, which Israel has named Operation Iron Swords, sounds like a tarot card, and which began in the wake of the Hamas-led assault on southern Israel on October 7, has seen the army significantly expand its bombing of targets that are not distinctly military in nature. These include private residences, as well as public buildings, infrastructure, and high-rise blocks, which sources say the army defines as power targets. And I don't know how to pronounce this, but as in Hebrew, this should be matarot otam. No, sorry if I mispronounced that. The bombing of power targets, according to intelligence sources who had first-hand experience with its application in Gaza in the past, is mainly intended to harm Palestinian civil society, to create a shock that, among other things, will reverberate powerfully and lead civilians to put pressure on Hamas, as one source put it. So, very questionable strategy, but maybe it can work. It's very brutal strategy, to say the least. But purely objectively, maybe it works, but doesn't mean I agree with it. Several of the sources who spoke to 972 and local call on the condition of anonymity confirmed that the Israeli army has files on the vast majority of potential targets in Gaza, including homes, which stipulate the number of civilians who are likely to be killed in an attack on a particular target. This number is calculated and known in advance to the Army's intelligence units, who also know shortly before carrying out an attack roughly how many civilians are certain to be killed. So they know what they're doing. In one case, discussed by the sources, the Israeli military command knowingly approved the killing of hundreds of Palestinian civilians in an attempt to assassinate a single top Hamas military commander. The numbers increased from dozens of civilian deaths permitted as collateral damage as part of an attack on a senior official in previous operations to hundreds of civilian deaths as collateral damage, said one source. Nothing happens by accident, said another source. When a 3-year-old girl is killed in a home in Gaza, it's because someone in the army decided it wasn't a big deal for her to be killed, that it was a price worth paying in order to hit another target. We are not Hamas. These are not random rockets. Everything is intentional. We know exactly how much collateral damage there is in every home. According to the investigation, Another reason for the large number of targets and the extensive harm to civilian life in Gaza is the widespread use of a system called Hapsora, the Gospel, which is largely built on artificial intelligence and can generate targets almost automatically at a rate that far exceeds what was previously possible. This AI system, as described by a former intelligence officer, essentially facilitates a mass assassination factory. According to the sources, the increasing use of AI based systems like Hapsora allows the army to carry out strikes on residential homes where a single Hamas member lives on a massive scale, even those who are junior Hamas operatives. Yet testimonies of Palestinians in Gaza suggest that since October 7th, the army has also attacked many private residences where there was no known or apparent member of Hamas or any other militant group residing. Such strikes, sources confirmed to 972 and local call, can knowingly kill entire families in the process. In the majority of cases, the sources added, military activity is not conducted from these targeted homes. I remember thinking that it was like if Palestinian militants would bomb all the private residences of our families when Israeli soldiers go back to sleep at home on the weekend. One source who was critical of this practice recalled. Not a completely fair comparison because the Israeli army operates like a standing army and Hamas has to blend in with the local population to function. But okay, this sort of makes sense to compare this. Another source said that a senior intelligence officer told his officers after October 7th that the goal was to kill as many Hamas operatives as possible, for which the criteria around harming Palestinian civilians were significantly relaxed. As such, there are cases in which we shell based on a wide cellular pinpointing of where the target is, killing civilians. This is often done to save time instead of doing a little more work to get more accurate pinpointing, said the source. The result of these policies is the staggering loss of human life in Gaza since October 7th. Over 300 families have lost 10 or more family members in Israeli bombings in the past 2 months, a number that is 15 times higher than the figure from what was previously Israel's deadliest war on Gaza in 2014. At the time of writing, around 15,000 Palestinians have been reported killed in the war and counting. All of this is happening contrary to the protocol used by the IDF in the past, a source explained. There is a feeling that senior officials in the army are aware of their failure on October 7th and are busy with the question of how to provide the Israeli public with an image of victory that will salvage their reputation. So here I agree. I think they are using excessive force to save face. An excuse to cause destruction. Israel launched its assault on Gaza in the aftermath of the October 7th Hamas led offensive on southern Israel. During that attack, under a hail of rocket fire, Palestinian militants massacred more than 840 civilians and killed 350 soldiers and security personnel, kidnapped around 240 people, civilians and soldiers, to Gaza and committed widespread sexual violence including rape, according to a report by the NGO Physicians for Human Rights Israel. Many people don't believe that there was this widespread sexual violence. I'm I'm leaning more towards that it happened. I think there was at least some sexual violence, but I don't know the exact extent of it. And maybe I'm wrong. From the first moment after the October 7th attack, decision makers in Israel openly declared that the response would be of a completely different magnitude to previous military operations in Gaza with the stated aim of totally eradicating Hamas. The emphasis is on damage and not on accuracy, said IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari. On October 9th, the army swiftly translated those declarations into actions. According to the sources who spoke to 972 and local call, the targets in Gaza that have been struck by Israeli aircraft can be divided roughly into four categories. The first is tactical targets, which include standard military targets such as armed militant cells, weapon warehouses, rocket launchers, anti-tank missile launchers, launch pits, mortar bombs, military headquarters, observation posts, and so on. So if you're going to do this, if you're going to attack Gaza, I don't have a problem that you target this. The second is underground targets, mainly tunnels that Hamas has dug under Gaza's neighborhoods, including under civilian homes. Aerial strikes on these targets could lead to the collapse of the homes above or near the tunnels. So I suppose if you really want to defeat Hamas, these tunnels have to go. And if those people are properly evacuated, I can still see some sense in that. The third is power targets, which includes high rises and residential towers in the heart of cities and public buildings such as universities, banks, and government offices. The idea behind hitting such targets, say three intelligence sources who were involved in planning or conducting strikes on power targets in the past, is that the deliberate attack on Palestinian society will exert civil pressure on Hamas. I really doubt that. I doubt it. I think they just want to see, they want to show the world what they're capable of. I don't think this works. The final category consists of family homes, or actually, this reminds me of Hitler trying to bomb London to demoralize Britain. It didn't work. The Luftwaffe in the battle for over England was successful at first. They were targeting the landing strips of the RAF, and it was actually working. But then Hitler decided that it would be better to bomb London. It was some kind of revenge bombing for the British targeting Berlin, and it didn't work. The English didn't give up. I also don't think this will work. The final category consists of family homes or operatives' homes. The stated purpose of these attacks is to destroy private residences in order to assassinate a single resident suspected of being a Hamas or Islamic Jihad operative. However, in the current war, Palestinian testimonies assert that some of the families that were killed did not include any operatives from these organizations. So, in such a small area as is Gaza, this kind of strategy can easily lead to killing a really absurd number of people. In the early stages of the current war, the Israeli army appears to have given particular attention to the third and fourth categories of targets. According to statements on October 11 by the IDF spokesperson, during the first 5 days of fighting, half of the targets bombed, 1,329 out of a total 2,687, were deemed power targets. So, we are asked to look for high-rise buildings with half a floor that can be attributed to Hamas, said one source who took part in previous Israeli offensives in Gaza. Sometimes it's a militant group's spokesperson's office or a point where operatives meet. I understood that the floor is an excuse that allows the army to cause a lot of destruction in Gaza. That's what they told us. If they would tell the whole world that the Islamic Jihad offices on the 10th floor are not important as a target, but that its existence is a justification to bring down the entire high rise with the aim of pressuring civilian families who live in it in order to put pressure on terrorist organizations, this would itself be seen as terrorism. So they do not say it, the source added. Well, people see it as terrorism anyway. Various sources who served in IDF intelligence units said that at least until the current war, army protocols allowed for attacking power targets only when the buildings were empty of residents at the time of the strike. However, testimonies and videos from Gaza suggest that since October 7, some of these targets have been attacked without prior notice being given to their occupants, killing entire families as a result. The wide-scale targeting of residential homes can be derived from public and official data, according to the government media office in Gaza, which has been providing death toll since the Gaza Health Ministry stopped doing so on November 11th due to the collapse of health services in the Strip. By the time the temporary ceasefire took hold on November 23rd, Israel had killed 14,800 Palestinians in Gaza. Approximately 6,000 of them were children and 4,000 were women, who together constitute more than 67% of the total. And this doesn't even include the wounded or people who die because of the circumstances the war creates. Not they were not directly hit by a bomb, but they die because of lack of care or lack of nutrition or something like that. The figures provided by the Health Ministry and the government media office, both of which fall under the auspices of the Hamas government, do not deviate significantly from Israeli estimates. The Gaza Health Ministry furthermore does not specify how many of the dead belong to the military wings of Hamas or Islamic Jihad. The Israeli army estimates that it has killed between 1,000 and 3,000 armed Palestinian militants. So that's a ridiculously low body count here. 1,000 and or between 1,000 and 3,000. That's almost nothing. That's probably not even 10%. According to media reports in Israel, some of the dead militants are buried under the rubble or inside Hamas's underground tunnel system, and therefore were not tallied in official counts. But even if we take 3,000, it's still not even 3% because there are probably about 40,000 Hamas militants. UN data for the period up until November 11, by which time Israel had killed 11,078 Palestinians in Gaza, states that at least 312 families have lost 10 or more people in the current Israeli attack. I don't even have 10 people in my entire family, but okay. That's a personal note. For the sake of comparison, during Operation Protective Edge in 2014, 20 families in Gaza lost 10 or more people. So the damage is way, way, way worse. At least 189 families have lost between 6 and 9 people according to the UN data, while 549 families have lost between 2 and 5 people. No updated breakdowns have yet been given for the casualty figures published since November 11th. The massive attacks on power targets and private residences came at the same time as the Israeli army on October 13th called on the 1.1 million residents of the northern Gaza Strip, most of them residing in Gaza City, to leave their homes and move to the south of the Strip. By that date, a record number of power targets had already been bombed, and more than 1,000 Palestinians had already been killed, including hundreds of children. In total, according to the UN, 1.7 million Palestinians, the vast majority of the Strip's population, have been displaced within Gaza since October 7th. The army claimed that the demand to evacuate the Strip's north was intended to protect civilian lives. Palestinians, however, see this mass displacement as part of a new Nakba, an attempt to ethnically cleanse parts or all of the territory. Yeah, maybe. But doing this kind of massive bombing and not asking them to evacuate would have been even worse, I suppose. They knocked down a high rise for the sake of it. According to the Israeli army, during the first 5 days of fighting, it dropped 6,000 bombs on the strip with a total weight of about 4,000 tons. It's huge. It's really a lot. Media outlets reported that the army had wiped out entire neighborhoods. According to the Gaza-based Al-Mezan Center for Human Rights, these attacks led to the complete destruction of residential neighborhoods, the destruction of infrastructure, and the mass killings of residents. As documented by Al-Mezan and numerous images coming out of Gaza, Israel bombed the Islamic University of Gaza, the Palestinian Bar Association, a UN building for an educational program for outstanding students, a building belonging to the Palestine Telecommunications Company, the Ministry of National Economy, the Ministry of Culture, roads, and dozens of high-rise buildings and homes, especially in Gaza's northern neighborhoods. This makes me think that you can't call it concentration camp. How many concentration camps have universities? On the fifth day of fighting, the IDF spokesperson distributed to military reporters in Israel before and after satellite images of neighborhoods in the northern strips, such as Shuyaiya and Al Furqan, very difficult to pronounce, nicknamed after a mosque in the area in Gaza city, which showed dozens of destroyed homes and buildings. The Israeli army said that it had struck 182 power targets in Shuyaiya and 312 power targets in Al Furqan. The chief of staff of the Israeli Air Force, Omer Tisher, told military reporters that all of these attacks had a legitimate military target, but also that entire neighborhoods were attacked on a large scale and not in a surgical manner. Noting that half of the military targets up until October 11 were power targets, the IDF spokesperson said that neighborhoods that serve as terror nests for Hamas were attacked and that damage was caused to operational headquarters, operational assets, and assets used by terrorist organizations inside residential buildings. On October 12th, the Israeli army announced it had killed three senior Hamas members, two of whom were part of the group's political wing. Yet, despite the unbridled Israeli bombardment, the damage to Hamas's military infrastructure in northern Gaza during the first days of the war appears to have been very minimal. Indeed, intelligence sources told 972 and local call that military targets that were part of power targets have previously been used many times as a fig leaf for harming the civilian population. Hamas is everywhere in Gaza. There is no building that does not have something of Hamas in it. So if you want to find a way to turn a high rise into a target, you will be able to do so, said one. They will never just hit a high rise that does not have something we can define as a military target, said another intelligence source who carried out previous strikes against power targets. There will always be a floor in the high rise associated with Hamas. But for the most part, when it comes to power targets, it is clear that the target doesn't have military value that justifies an attack that would bring down the entire empty building in the middle of a city with the help of 6 planes and bombs weighing several tons. Indeed, according to sources who were involved in the compiling of power targets in previous wars, although the target file usually contains some kind of alleged association with Hamas or other militant groups, striking the target functions primarily as a means that allows damage to civil society. The sources understood, some explicitly and some implicitly, that damage to civilians is the real purpose of these attacks. So, if this is true, and it seems to be true, then using the term genocide is not that inaccurate. In May 2021, for example, Israel was heavily criticized for bombing the Al Jalal Tower, which housed prominent international media outlets such as Al Jazeera, AP, and AFP. The army claimed that the building was a Hamas military target. Sources have told 972 and local call that it was in fact a power target. The perception is that it really hurts Hamas when high rise buildings are taken down because it creates a public reaction in the Gaza Strip and scares the population, said one of the sources. They wanted to give the citizens of Gaza the feeling that Hamas is not in control of the situation. Sometimes they toppled buildings and sometimes postal service and government buildings. I really don't think that Palestinians in Gaza then lose faith in Hamas. I already think that they think that Hamas can't really protect them, and I don't think they have this association with protection. Like Hamas is supposed to stop Israel from doing this. I think they simply blame Israel, and maybe here and there you can find a Palestinian who will blame Hamas, but I doubt it. Although it is unprecedented for the Israeli army to attack more than 1,000 power targets in 5 days, the idea of causing mass devastation to civilian areas for strategic purposes was formulated in previous military operations in Gaza, honed by the so-called Dahiya doctrine from the Second Lebanon War of 2006. According to the doctrine, developed by former IDF Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot, who is now a Knesset member and part of the current war cabinet, In a war against guerrilla groups such as Hamas or Hezbollah, Israel must use disproportionate and overwhelming force while targeting civilian and government infrastructure in order to establish deterrence and force the civilian population to pressure the groups to end their attacks. The concept of power targets seems to have emanated from this same logic. I think it's very questionable if this works or not. The first time the Israeli army publicly defined power targets in Gaza was at the end of Operation Protective Edge in 2014. The army bombed 4 buildings during the last 4 days of the war, 3 residential multi-story buildings in Gaza City, and a high-rise in Rafah. The security establishment explained at the time that the attacks were intended to convey to the Palestinians of Gaza that nothing is immune anymore, and to put pressure on Hamas to agree to a ceasefire. I doubt that Hamas wants to get a ceasefire just because of this. That's not how I see Hamas. They use damage to their advantage, both in the propaganda war and as a way to lure in the IDF and fight them on the ground. The evidence we collected shows that the massive destruction of the buildings was carried out deliberately and without any military justification, stated an Amnesty report in late 2014. So, in another violent escalation that began in November 2018, the army once again attacked power targets. That time, Israel bombed high-rises, shopping centers, and the building of the Hamas-affiliated Al-Aqsa TV station. Attacking power targets produces a very significant effect on the other side, one Air Force officer stated at the time. We did it without killing anyone, and we made sure that the building and its surroundings were evacuated. Previous operations have also shown how striking these targets is meant not only to harm Palestinian morale, but also to raise the morale inside Israel. That's something else. I think it does raise morale inside Israel. Haaretz revealed that during Operation Guardian of the Walls in 2021, the IDF spokesperson's unit conducted a psyop against Israeli citizens in order to boost awareness of the IDF's operations in Gaza and the damage they caused to Palestinians. Soldiers who used fake social media accounts to conceal the campaign's origin uploaded images and clips of the army's strikes in Gaza to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok in order to demonstrate the army's prowess to the Israeli public. So I don't like this kind of technique because this gives ammunition to people who want to criticize Israel and say that they put out lies. That all these kind of deceptions, it creates a very negative atmosphere for Israel in the propaganda war. During the 2021 assault, Israel struck 9 targets that were defined as power targets, all of them high-rise buildings. The goal was to collapse the high-rises in order to put pressure on Hamas, and also so that the Israeli public would see a victory image, one security source told 972, and local call. However, the source continued, it didn't work. As someone who has followed Hamas, I heard firsthand how much they did not care about the civilians and the buildings that were taken down. Sometimes the army found something in a high-rise building that was related to Hamas, but it was also possible to hit that specific target with more accurate weaponry. The bottom line is that they knocked down a high-rise for the sake of knocking down a high-rise. Everyone was looking for their children in these piles. Not only has the current war seen Israel attack an unprecedented number of power targets, it has also seen the army abandon prior policies that aimed at avoiding harm to civilians. Whereas previously the army's official procedure was that it was possible to attack power targets only after all civilians had been evacuated from them, testimonies from Palestinian residents in Gaza indicate that since October 7th, Israel has attacked high rises with their residents still inside or without having taken significant steps to evacuate them, leading to many civilian deaths. Such attacks very often result in the killing of entire families, as experienced in previous offensives. According to an investigation by AP conducted after the 2014 war, about 89% of those killed in the aerial bombings of family homes were unarmed residents, and most of them were children and women. This year, the Air Force Chief of Staff confirmed a shift in policy, telling reporters that the Army's roof knocking policy, whereby it would fire a small initial strike on the roof of a building to warn residents that it is about to be struck, is no longer in use where there is an enemy. Roof knocking, Tisho said, is a term that is relevant to rounds of fighting and not to war. The sources who have previously worked on power targets said that the brazen strategy of the current war could be a dangerous development, explaining that attacking power targets was originally intended to shock Gaza but not necessarily to kill large numbers of civilians. The targets were designed with the assumption that high rises would be evacuated of people, so when we were working on compiling the targets, there was no concern whatsoever regarding how many civilians would be harmed. The assumption was that the number would always be zero, said one source with deep knowledge of the tactic. This would mean there would be a total evacuation of the targeted buildings, which takes 2 to 3 hours, during which the residents are called by phone to evacuate. Warning missiles are fired, and we also cross check with drone footage that people are indeed leaving the high rise, the source added. However, evidence from Gaza suggests that some high rises, which we assume to have been power targets, were toppled without prior warning. 972 and local call located at least 2 cases during the current war in which entire residential high rises were bombed and collapsed without warning, and one case in which, according to the evidence, a high rise building collapsed on civilians who were inside. On October 10th, Israel bombed the Babel building in Gaza, according to the testimony of Bilal Abu Hazira, who rescued bodies from the ruins that night. 10 people were killed in the attack on the building, including 3 journalists. Even yesterday, I saw a video where they claim that already more journalists have been killed in Gaza than in the entire Vietnam War. On October 25th, the 12-story Altai residential building in Gaza City was bombed to the ground, killing the families living inside it without warning. About 120 people were buried under the ruins of their apartments, according to the testimonies of residents. Yusuf Amar Sharaf, a resident of Altai, wrote on X that 37 of his family members who lived in the building were killed in the attack. My dear father and mother, my beloved wife, my sons, and most of my brothers and their families. Residents stated that a lot of bombs were dropped, damaging and destroying apartments in nearby buildings too. 6 days later, on October 31st, the 8-story Al Mohansin residential building was bombed without warning. Between 30 and 45 bodies were reportedly recovered from the ruins on the first day. One baby was found alive without his parents. Journalists estimated that over 150 people were killed in the attack, as many remain buried under the rubble. The building used to stand in Nusayrat's refugee camp south of Wadi Gaza, in the supposed safe zone to which Israel directed the Palestinians who fled their homes in northern and central Gaza, and therefore served as temporary shelter for the displaced, according to testimonies. According to an investigation by Amnesty International on October 9th, Israel shelled at least 3 multi-story buildings as well as an open flea market on a crowded street in the Jabalia refugee camp, killing at least 69 people. The bodies were burned. I didn't want to look. I was scared of looking at Imad's face, said the father of a child who was killed. Phew, this is heavy stuff. I'm seeing the face of my own son now. The in my head, I mean, he's in kindergarten. The bodies were scattered on the floor. Everyone was looking for their children in these piles. I recognized my son only by his trousers. I wanted to bury him immediately, so I carried my son and got him out. Well, if that doesn't get you. According to Amnesty's investigation, the army said that the attack on the market area was aimed at a mosque where there were Hamas operatives. A mosque shouldn't be bombed anyway. However, according to the same investigation, satellite images do not show a mosque in the vicinity. The IDF spokesperson did not address 972s and local calls queries about specific attacks, but stated more generally that the IDF provided warnings before attacks in various ways, and when the circumstances allowed it, also delivered individual warnings through phone calls to people who were at or near the targets. There were more from 2005 no 25,000 live conversations during the war, alongside millions of recorded conversations, text messages, and leaflets dropped from the air for the purpose of warning the population. In general, the IDF works to reduce harm to civilians as part of the attacks as much as possible, despite the challenge of fighting a terrorist organization that uses the citizens of Gaza as human shields. The machine produced 100 targets in one day. According to the IDF spokesperson, by November 10, during the first 35 days of fighting, Israel attacked a total of 15,000 targets in Gaza. Based on multiple sources, this is a very high figure compared to the four previous major operations in the Strip. During Guardian of the Walls in 2021, Israel attacked 1,500 targets in 11 days. In Protective Edge in 2014, which lasted 51 days, Israel struck between 5,266 and 6,231 targets. During Pillar of Defense in 2012, about 1,500 targets were attacked over 8 days. In Cast Lead in 2008, Israel struck 3,400 targets in 22 days. Intelligence sources who served in the previous operations also told 972 and local call that for 10 days in 2021 and 3 weeks in 2014, an attack rate of 100 to 200 targets per day led to a situation in which the Israeli Air Force had no targets of military value left. Why then, after nearly 2 months, has the Israeli army not yet run out of targets in the current war? The answer may lie in a statement from the IDF spokesperson on November 2nd, according to which it is using the AI system Absora, the Gospel, which the spokesperson says enables the use of automatic tools to produce targets at a fast pace and works by improving accurate and high quality intelligence material according to operational needs. In the statement, a senior intelligence official is quoted as saying that thanks to Hafsora, targets are created for precision strikes while causing great damage to the enemy and minimal damage to non-combatants. Hamas operatives are not immune no matter where they hide. According to intelligence sources, Hafsora generates, among other things, automatic recommendations for attacking private residences where people suspected of being Hamas or Islamic Jihad operatives live. Israel then carries out large-scale assassination operations through the heavy shelling of these residential homes. Hafsora explained one of the sources processes enormous amounts of data that tens of thousands of intelligence officers could not process, and recommends bombing sites in real time because most senior Hamas officials head into underground tunnels with the start of any military operation. The sources say the use of a system like Hafsora makes it possible to locate and attack the homes of relatively junior operatives. One former intelligence officer explained that the Hafsora system enables the army to run a mass assassination factory in which the emphasis is on quantity and not on quality. A human eye will go over the target before each attack, but it need not spend a lot of time on them. Since Israel estimates that there are approximately 30,000 Hamas members in Gaza, and they are all marked for death, the number of potential targets is enormous. So far they have killed between 1,000 and 3,000. You can imagine how many people need to die to get all of them. In 2019, the Israeli army created a new center aimed at using AI to accelerate target generation. The Targets Administrative Division is a unit that includes hundreds of officers and soldiers and is based on AI capabilities, said former IDF Chief of Staff Aviv Kochavi in an in-depth interview with Ynet earlier this year. This is a machine that, with the help of AI, processes a lot of data better and faster than any human and translates it into targets for attack, Kochavi went on. The result was that in Operation Guardian of the Walls in 2021, from the moment this machine was activated, it generated 100 new targets every day. You see, in the past, there were times in Gaza when we would create 50 targets per year, and here the machine produced 100 targets in one day. We prepare the targets automatically and work according to a checklist. One of the sources who worked in the new targets administrative division told 972 on local call, "It really is like a factory. We work quickly and there is no time to delve deep into the targets. The view is that we are judged according to how many targets we manage to generate." A senior, sorry, a senior military official in charge of the target bank told the Jerusalem Post earlier this year that thanks to the Army's AI systems, for the first time the military can generate new targets at a faster rate than it attacks. Another source said the drive to automatically generate large numbers of targets is a realization of the Dahiya doctrine. Automated systems like Hafsora have thus greatly facilitated the work of Israeli intelligence officers in making decisions during military operations, including calculating potential casualties. 5 different sources confirmed that the number of civilians who may be killed in attacks on private residences is known in advance to Israeli intelligence and appears clearly in the target file under the category of collateral damage. According to these sources, there are degrees of collateral damage according to which the army determines whether it is possible to attack a target inside a private residence. When the general directive becomes collateral damage 5, that means we are authorized to strike all targets that will kill 5 or less civilians. We can act on all target files that are 5 or less, said one of the sources. In the past, we did not regularly mark the homes of junior Hamas members for bombing, said a security official who participated in attacking targets during previous operations. In my time, if the house I was working on was marked collateral damage 5, it would not always be approved for attack. Such approval, he said, would only be received if a senior Hamas commander was known to be living in the home. To my understanding, today they can mark all the houses of any Hamas military operative regardless of rank, the source continued. That is a lot of houses. Hamas members who don't really matter for anything live in homes across Gaza. So they mark the home and bomb the house and kill everyone there. A concerted policy to bomb family homes. On October 22nd, the Israeli Air Force bombed the home of the Palestinian journalist Ahmed al-Nouh in the city of Deir al-Balah. Ahmed is a close friend and colleague of mine. 4 years ago, we founded a Hebrew Facebook page called Across the Wall with the aim of bringing Palestinian voices from Gaza to the Israeli public. The strike on October 22nd collapsed blocks of concrete onto Ahmed's entire family, killing his father, brother, sisters, and all of their children, including babies. Only his 12-year-old niece, Malak, survived and remained in a critical condition, her body covered in burns. A few days later, Malak died. Yeah, she would have been better for her to die immediately. Horrible. 21 members of Ahmed's family were killed in total, buried under their home. None of them were militants. The youngest was 2 years old, the oldest, his father, was 75. Ahmed, who is currently living in the UK, is now alone out of his entire family. So horrible. That man's life is a living hell now. Ahmed's family WhatsApp group is titled Better Together. The last message that appears there was sent by him a little after midnight on the night he lost his family. Someone let me know that everything is fine, he wrote. No one answered. He fell asleep but woke up in a panic at 4 a.m. Drenched in sweat, he checked his phone again, silence. Then he received a message from a friend with the terrible news. Ahmed's case is known in Gaza these days. In interviews to the press, heads of Gaza hospitals have been echoing the same description. Families enter hospitals as a succession of corpses, a child followed by his father, followed by his grandfather. The bodies are all covered in dirt and blood. Yeah, at the start of this, I read somewhere that the father was spreading around his kids all over Gaza to prevent them from all of them being killed in one strike. Horrible. According to former Israeli intelligence officers, in many cases in which a private residence is bombed, the goal is the assassination of Hamas or Jihad operatives, and such targets are attacked when the operative enters the home. Intelligence researchers know if the operative's family members or neighbors may also die in an attack, and they know how to calculate how many of them may die. Each of the sources said that these are private homes where, in the majority of cases, no military activity is carried out. 972 and local call do not have data regarding the number of military operatives who were indeed killed or wounded by aerial strikes on private residences in the current war, but there is ample evidence that in many cases none were military or political operatives belonging to Hamas or Islamic Jihad. On October 10th, the Israeli Air Force bombed an apartment building in Gaza's Sheikh Radwan neighborhood, killing 40 people, most of them women and children. In one of the shocking videos taken following the attack, people are seen screaming, holding what appears to be a doll pulled from the ruins of the house and passing it from hand to hand. When the camera zooms in, one can see that it's not a doll, but a body of a baby. Gruesome. One of the residents said that 19 members of his family were killed in the strike. Another survivor wrote on Facebook that he only found his son's shoulder in the rubble. Amnesty investigated the attack and discovered that a Hamas member lived on one of the upper floors of the building but was not present at the time of the attack. The bombing of family homes where Hamas or Islamic Jihad operatives supposedly live likely became a more concerted IDF policy during Operation Protective Edge in 2014. Back then, 606 Palestinians, about a quarter of the civilian deaths during the 51 days of fighting, were members of families whose homes were bombed. A UN report defined it in 2015 as both a potential war crime and a new pattern of action that led to the death of entire families. In 2014, 93 babies were killed as a result of Israeli bombings of family homes, of which 13 were under 1 year old. A month ago, 286 babies aged 1 or under were already identified as having been killed in Gaza, according to a detailed ID list with the ages of victims published by the Gaza Health Ministry on October 26. The number has since likely doubled or tripled. However, in many cases, and especially during the current attacks on Gaza, the Israeli army has carried out attacks that struck private residences even when there is no known or clear military target. For example, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists by November 29, Israel had killed 50 Palestinian journalists in Gaza, some of them in their homes with their families. Roshdi Sarai, 31, a journalist from Gaza who was born in Britain, founded a media outlet in Gaza called AIM Media. On October 22, an Israeli bomb struck his parents' home where he was sleeping, killing him. The journalist Salamima similarly died under the ruins of her home after it was bombed. Of her three young children, Hadi, 7, died, while Sham, 3, has not yet been found under the rubble. Two other journalists, Dua Sharaf and Salma Makheimer, were killed together with their children in their homes. Israeli analysts have admitted that the military effectiveness of these kinds of disproportionate aerial attacks is limited. 2 weeks after the start of the bombings in Gaza and before the ground invasion, after the bodies of 1,903 children, approximately 1,000 women, and 187 elderly men were counted in the Gaza Strip, Israeli commentator Avi Issacharoff tweeted, "As hard as it is to hear, on the 14th day of fighting, it does not appear that the military arm of Hamas has been significantly harmed. The most significant damage to the military leadership is the assassination of Hamas commander Ayman Nofal, which I don't think damages them that much. And they could have foreseen this. Like, I'm no military expert, but I said from the start that this is not the way to destroy Hamas. But okay. Fighting human animals. Hamas militants regularly operate out of an intricate network of tunnels built under large stretches of the Gaza Strip. These tunnels, as confirmed by the former Israeli intelligence officers we spoke to, also pass under homes and roads. Therefore, Israeli attempts to destroy them with aerial strikes are in many cases likely to lead to the killing of civilians. This may be another reason for the high number of Palestinian families wiped out in the current offensive. The intelligence officers interviewed for this article said that the way Hamas designed the tunnel network in Gaza knowingly exploits the civilian population and infrastructure above ground. I believe that this is also disgusting. Clever, but disgusting. These claims were also the basis of the media campaign that Israel conducted vis-à-vis the attacks and raids on Al-Shifa hospital and the tunnels that were discovered under it. Israel has also attacked a large number of military targets, armed Hamas operatives, rocket launcher sites, snipers, anti-tank squads, military headquarters, bases, observation posts, and more. From the beginning of the ground invasion, aerial bombardment and heavy artillery fire have been used to provide backup to Israeli troops on the ground. Experts in international law say these targets are legitimate as long as the strikes comply with the principle of proportionality. In response to an inquiry from 972 and local call for this article, the IDF spokesperson stated, the IDF is committed to international law and acts according to it, and in doing so attacks military targets and does not attack civilians. That's complete bullshit. The terrorist organization Hamas places its operatives and military assets in the heart of the civilian population. Hamas systematically uses the civilian population as a human shield and conducts combat from civilian buildings, including sensitive sites such as hospitals, mosques, schools, and UN facilities. Well, if you know that, it's still your choice to not attack. It's a choice you have. You don't have to do this. I've heard the reasoning that Israel has to do this because otherwise it shows weakness and other countries may attack it. That's the only justification I can find for this, and I'm not even sure if it's a great justification, but maybe. Intelligence sources who spoke to 972 and local call similarly claimed that in many cases Hamas deliberately endangers the civilian population in Gaza and tries to forcefully prevent civilians from evacuating. Two sources said that Hamas leaders understand that Israeli harm to civilians gives them legitimacy in fighting. No. So, could be true, probably is true. At the same time, while it's hard to imagine how the idea of dropping a one-ton bomb aimed at killing a Hamas operative, yet ended up killing an entire family as collateral damage, was not always so readily accepted by large swaths of Israeli society. 2002, for example, the Israeli Air Force bombed the home of Salah Mustafa Muhammad Shahade, then the head of the Al-Qassam Brigade, Hamas's military wing. The bomb killed him, his wife, Iman, his 14-year-old daughter, Layla, and 14 other civilians, including 11 children. The killing caused a public uproar in both Israel and the world, and Israel was accused of committing war crimes. They seem to be accused of war crimes all the time. That criticism led to a decision by the Israeli army in 2003 to drop a smaller quarter-ton bomb on a meeting of top Hamas officials, including the elusive leader of Al-Qassam Brigade, Mohammed Deif, taking place in a residential building in Gaza, despite the fear that it would not be powerful enough to kill them. In his book, To Know Hamas, veteran Israeli journalist Shlomi Eldar wrote that the decision to use a relatively small bomb was due to the Shahade precedent and the fear that a one-ton bomb would kill the civilians in the building as well. The attack failed, and the senior military wing officers fled the scene. So here, some sort of defense for using a bigger bomb. In December 2008, in the first major war that Israel waged against Hamas after it seized power in Gaza, Yoav Gallant, who at the time headed the IDF Southern Command, said that for the first time Israel was hitting the family homes of senior Hamas officials with the aim of destroying them but not harming their families. Gallant emphasized that the homes were attacked after the families were warned by a knock on the roof as well as by phone call after it was clear that Hamas military activity was taking place inside the house. After 2014's protective edge, during which Israel began to systematically strike family homes from the air, human rights groups like Salem collected testimonies from Palestinians who survived these attacks. The survivors said the homes collapsed in on themselves, glass shards cut the bodies of those inside, the debris smells of blood, and people were buried alive. This deadly policy continues today, thanks in part to the use of destructive weaponry and sophisticated technology like Hafsora, but also to a political and security establishment that has loosened the reins on Israel's military machinery. 15 years after insisting that the army was taking pains to minimize civilian harm, Gallant's now defense minister has clearly changed his tune. We are fighting human animals and we act accordingly, he said after October 7th. Thank you for listening. Until next time.